turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh, my goodness. 2 on the clock.
Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Basketball Fix podcast, NBL Supercoach sessions with myself and Jeremy Dark. Jeremy, how you going, mate? And how was your Supercoach last week, mate? It sounds like the king has been dethroned in some sense of the imagination.
Some sense, but it wasn't an absolute catastrophe. It went all right,
No,
but
it
it could have definitely could have been better. I think it was, I struggled with the same thing that you struggled with the first couple of rounds. Was definitely captain choice hurt me this week. Had Magnay as my captain. He played sort of half a game there in the second game, struggling with the flu, and was pretty poor in the first game as well. So he, I think, finished on like 50 points or something like that, 49. Obviously, massive difference if you captained your boy, Mr. Kendrick Davis, which you can go on about. But yeah, I dropped 115 places down to 159 with a score of 400. So yeah, it was a tough week, but still in the mix. I'm still confident. I feel good coming into this week, even though it's going to be a real challenging week this week, I think.
Yeah, it definitely will, mate. And I'm just going to go into quickly my recap of this round in particular as well. So I finished with 437 points. I rose up the ranks 1,684 points places now. So I'm into 651. And I had a round rank of 355 for the week. There were some pretty incredible scores though as well. I saw a 471, I think, was the top score of the round. So, you know, it all comes back to, like we've been talking about, it's about having a solid foundation behind you. So when you nail those captain scores, you can rise up the ranks. And I think that's what both of us have done to start the season. You've done it a little bit better now as well, obviously with a couple more weeks. And I've finally nailed a captain option this week, mate. But let's get into a little bit of a round recap, obviously, from the week that was. Now, I'm going to kick it off here, mate, because the biggest talking point that I think we have to talk about was my boy, Kendrick Davis. Now, we posted this on our Instagram. So if you guys don't follow us on Instagram, make sure you go and check it out, the Basketball Fix podcast on Instagram. Give us a follow and follow all of our stuff over there. But we posted our teams and, you know, the shout out to the Love of the Game Instagram page as well. They're doing amazing things. He commented on there as well, and he's like, oh, do we trust Kendrick Davis for this week? And me and you had a bit of a back and forth there, Jez, in those comment sections as well, and spoke about it. But we were repaid, I guess you could say, obviously, if you did captain Kendrick Davis. He finished the round, if you captained him, with 172 points as our captain. Had a massive week, 86 points if you didn't captain him, which is still a massive, massive total. So that is the highest points in a round so far in NBL 25. And that is one of the higher point rounds that I've seen in a long period of time as well, in terms of NBL fantasy back in the day, and then obviously NBL Supercoach as well. But there were some massive scores all around. Jack White finished with a 75, Milton Doyle with a 67, Montrezl Harrell with a 61, Christian Doolittle with a 60, and Xavier Cooks as well has really started like a bullet at a gate. He had a 48 in this particular week as well, which I'm sure we'll touch on him a little bit later. But what were some of your thoughts, mate, about obviously round three's reactions and recap? And, you know, who are some guys that played well, maybe didn't play well, and who are some guys who obviously have increased in value as well?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the Cairns players, I think Taran Armstrong has come onto the scene and is definitely something to look at this week, depending on what sort of tactics you're moving forward with, which we will go into a little bit later. But yeah, he certainly started well. Mayuk Deng, as you can see there, he had a really, really big week. Maybe struggled the first couple of rounds, but I think all the numbers with the Cairns players are really, really tough to read, because now that Taran Armstrong is here, they had an extremely good weekend on the court in the actual, like, obviously won both of their games. And it's going to be interesting to see how you find that balance now with these players and who is going to be the consistent scorers. I think there's going to be guys, obviously, that have big games, small games, but who are the ones that are must-haves when their double game weeks and stuff come around. And looking forward to this week, and then they have, another double game week just around the corner after next week. So they're very, very interesting players that you've really got to start to look at. And then there was some real sort of shockers as well, wasn't there? I think when we did this post, I had Bryce Cotton in my team as my captain. And at least Magnay did better than that. So I saved my ass, really, because I could have been in a world more trouble if I still had Cotton as my captain, because he had an absolute shocker and went down 41.2k. So yeah, glad I avoided that one. But yeah, your boy as well, your other boy, Mr. Nathan Sobey, had a bit of a tough week, huh?
Yeah, he did. And I want to quickly flag Cotton because I remember we had this conversation last week when you were thinking about bringing him in, obviously, with the Jalen Adams combination. And I sort of flagged, obviously, the fact that his break even was 90 last week. And if he was to still score, 60 to 65 points, which is probably what you would have expected, not 50, but he still would have gone down a significant amount of cash. But now he's obviously gone down, like you mentioned, the 41 and still has a break even this week in a single game week of 58 points as well. So it's going to make it very, very juicy for us in a couple of weeks when they've got a massive run of doubles. I think the Perth Wildcats would have sorted out all their, blunders and all their things going on. And he's going to be a must have, I think, for that period of time. But yeah, you touched on Nathan Sobey, mate. My boy, I'm a massive fan of Nathan Sobey. I think he's one of the top 5 players in the NBL. He's a must have in NBL Supercoach. I just think he is just the pinnacle of NBL basketball, mate. But he dropped 23.6k this week, mate, and comes into a single game week with a break even of 43, which is terrible. So I think he's now sitting at 293,000, which could be one of those ones that we do look on, and it makes me feel sick even saying this, but maybe later on in the season, he's a guy that we could look on if they figure out his role, and he could be dirt cheap to bring in and make some obviously cash and some points as well. But it's going to be interesting to see obviously where we do go from here, because, like we said in our first introductory sort of episode to NBL Supercoach, it's about sort of having a nice balance between those cash cows, those middle price players, and obviously those top end players who are going to give us the scoring and not necessarily the cash increases. But it's going to be a very interesting sort of weeks coming up, I think. Now let's get into the schedulizer here, mate. Now, I'm going to kick it off with the double game weeks. So the double game weeks have got Adelaide, Cairns, and Sydney all with a double game week, with none of those teams now going into a double game week. So Adelaide and Cairns will be coming off the double game week, and then the Sydney Kings will come back into the double game week, mate. But who are some of the single teams or the single game weeks that we've got this coming up, mate? And who are you sort of looking at to sort of attack in a sense as well?
Yeah, well, everybody else are on a single game week, obviously, 7 teams, but it's looking ahead. I think what makes this round the most interesting, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when we go into our buys, holds, and sells, but it's the fact that nobody has a double game week next week, and there's even you don't really have an overload of players for round 5's double game week in the New Zealand Breakers coming back into the frame and having 3 double game weeks in a row, and then also the Jack Jumpers. So that sort of makes it really, really tough, because you don't want to get caught next week with your pants down. I think that's the key for me anyway, and my tactic, which you'll see when we have a look at our teams, is making sure that you have something there, because I think next week could definitely be a boost week for some people, bringing in 3 new players that are on a double game week, but you could still be in a lot of trouble. And I think we'll see a big shift in maybe these people that are at the top or at the bottom, because there is going to be some teams there where people don't have enough players, or you're going to have maybe 2 or just 3 starters that are on a double game week in that week. But then there could be people that plan for it better and are going to jump up the rankings, and people that haven't played that are going to fall down. So there's going to be a big shift there, I think.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that a little bit more, because I've seen that you've got something written a bit further down in terms of obviously those double game weeks as well. But I'm not necessarily too gung-ho on this particular double game week, because we've only got 2 teams. I'm talking about next week, I should say, sorry, in round number 5. But we'll only have the New Zealand Breakers and the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers in that. And then obviously the only team out of them, the New Zealand Breakers, will have a double game week like you mentioned. So I'm not too sold on obviously having too many of them. I think if you've got quality players who can score you 40 points or 35 points in a single game week, I think you're still going to be able to leverage the gap a little bit. And then obviously your teams will look better, obviously, as the weeks go on, because you don't want to be too hindsighted in obviously trying to win a round or moving up the ranks for 1 week, because you've got to remember that this schedulizer is brutal the further it goes along, and it's going to start to be very, very hard. So I think, like you said, I think 2 or 3 is the maximum amount that you can have on a double game week next week, because I think any more than that, it's going to be a little bit too much unless you're trying to win the round. But just recapping, obviously, the single game weeks there are Brisbane, Melbourne, Southeast Melbourne, Perth, the Jack Jumpers, and the Hawks. And then obviously there is no games for the New Zealand Breakers this week, as they are still in America for their NBL, NBA preseason games. Now, let's get into our favorite segment here, mate. Buy, hold, and sell. And I'm going to kick it off here, mate, because there's 2 guys and 2 names who I think are on the forefront of everyone's minds this week, and that is Xavier Cooks and Jalen Adams. And can you bring in both of them? Do you only want to bring in one of them? It really does come down to obviously how your team is structured from the current setting right now. And when we go into my team a little bit later, I would love to get one of these guys in, but I'm really struggling to sort of bring one of these guys in without using a boost trade, to be honest with you, mate. But if we're looking at break evens, Xavier Cooks is probably the better option to go with, but it obviously does come down to structure. So Cooks has a 60 break even compared to Jalen Adams' 83 break even as well. But I still think they can both hit these. I think they've got massive chances to have double games, which really does increase the scoring, as we've seen with guys like Jack White, guys like Will Magnay over the last couple of weeks as well. You know, they've really got those propelling points, obviously, from that extra 5 that does happen as well. So it's going to be interesting. And Taron Armstrong is another buy that I'm looking at sort of bringing into my team, priced at 199K. So it's going to be interesting with him. He's got a great role. He's got the keys to the team, the keys to the city, and I just think it's going to be a very interesting one. But buyer beware, he is carrying a little bit of a niggle and a bit of an injury into round number 4. But Jez, who are some of the guys that you're looking at obviously bringing in this week to maybe set yourself up for next week, or obviously bring yourself in a nice little amount of points, obviously, for round number 4?
Yeah, well, obviously I think you want, when you're looking at Sydney and their double game week, you want to have Xavier Cooks and Jalen Adams, like you said. I fiddled around with my team a little bit to try and get Xavier Cooks in and Jalen Adams and have them both, but that would be at the sacrifice of next week. So that's what I'm sort of dealing with at the moment, with first reactions on a Monday morning of what to do, because yeah, it could have them both, but I'd have to lose then, take out Will Magnay, and I want to, as we move into the next part, I want to hold Will Magnay to next week. But then, and it's sort of, if you're trying to prepare for not just this week, but make sure you do have something for next week, I'm looking at bringing in Menenga into my team, and I have him in there at the moment because just to give me that little extra bit of double game week action, that maybe some people aren't going to have, just to give me that little bit of a boost. And then obviously you can hold him through because he's at 154,000, I believe. And he's obviously, I think his break even was 0. So if you bring him in, he's going to be a 0 score this week, but then I'll have him next week and he should have a very, very nice, juicy price rise coming after the double game week next week. So hopefully that'll all pan out, but we'll see how, it definitely goes. But that's where I'm looking at on the buy section at the moment. Josh, who are your holds this week?
Yeah, it's going to definitely be interesting. Sorry, I've just got a quick little thing here, though. So when we're touching on, obviously, Jalen Adams and Xavier Cooks, they have a double game week this week before going into a single next week, then a double after that. So, if you're looking at, like I mentioned there, guys who could score 35 to 40 points in one single week, they're the guys who you could look at. And then you're obviously going to get the benefit of having 2 double game weeks after the single next week. But yeah, mate, obviously getting into our holds now. Now, I've got a couple. So in my head, I've actually kept both of these guys currently, but it's Jack White or Shea Illy for me. So Jack White has a break even of 9. Illy has a break even of 8. I think both can still make some great cash. They've still got a relatively good run coming up. So Melbourne have a single, and then will then play 3 double game weeks in a row after that. So if I can somehow hold on to these guys on my bench potentially, or even start a guy like Jack White, who could give me those 35 to 40 points, I could be looking in pretty good stead when they come into their double game weeks and all that sort of stuff as well. But it's going to be interesting, mate. But who have you got in terms of some holds, mate? Because you've got one guy who I think is a bit disappointing in front of you, but you're obviously going to hold him next week with the double game week coming up.
Yeah, definitely Magnay. That's the tactic at the moment, like I said just before. because he's a lot of cash to have on as a hold. For me, especially when there is some really, really good options out there to replace him, to have sort of a massive score this week. But that is the biggest challenge in this whole thing is, okay, do you go for a big score now, or do you make sure that you're feeling good and you're in good shape the week after, or do you look for someone where you can bring in and earn a bit of cash? So that's the real struggle for me this week with Magne. And then Jonah Antonio is a little bit of dead weight on my team. He had a good few weeks. He earned some really good cash, but he's obviously playing like third fiddle now that Taron Armstrong's back. But I also see he still played okay minutes, I think, and okay minutes to be able to score enough points to hold his own and at least not lose money. But he just didn't take enough shots on the weekend either. So hopefully he does just get a few more chances and takes a few more shots just to hold him. But he is on the chopping block, even if they have the double game week in the week after. What round will that be? Round 6. I think you still got to get rid of him because he's just going to bleed all the money eventually that he just earned, because you don't expect him to score sort of more than 5 points. So that's a little bit of a tough spot, but it's a priority thing in just working the break even so you don't lose money. That's why I've decided to hold him this week, but we'll be getting rid of him likely next week if the right trade does come up.
Definitely, mate. And I'm going to put it straight back onto you now as well. Jump straight into your sells for this week in the upcoming round as well. What are you looking like to be getting rid of in your Supercoach team?
Yeah, well, I still had Aldrich on my bench, but a similar sort of thing that was there with Antonio it was just a matter of who I could sell and what the right time was. He still earned a little bit of cash, but now it's time for him to go, and I have got rid of Jack White. But yeah, it's also sort of tough because, like you said, they do go into a good run in 2 weeks. It's just a matter if you can carry that amount of money. I think this Jack White will be sort of the swap that I get if I want to get rid of Magne and bring in Xavier Cooks as well as Jalen Adams. I'll get to keep Jack White on my team and get rid of Magne. So that'll be the swap that I'll be doing personally. And it just all depends on the tactic that you take. Take care of next week, or do you look even to the future, or do you go big this week and make sure you don't fall behind again? Which is sort of where I'm feeling, because I obviously lost 150 spots last week and I want to have another good week and move up those standings. But I don't know. Got to play it safe. Who are you? Who is on your chopping block?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with the whole Magne thing, because I just pulled his break even up here as well. So he's going to break even at 41 in a single game week. So, he's probably going to look at losing potentially 10K. It's very doable, 100%. But let's just say he has another game like he did against the Perth Wildcats where he only scored around 20 points. We could be looking at a guy who made 20K and loses 20K very, very quickly. But in terms of obviously the guys that I'm looking like I'm selling right now, when we bring up our teams later on, these are the two guys that I have sold. So I've sold Marcus Lee and Will Hickey. Now, Lee was a bit of a risky play in a sense. It's good to get rid of him in some sense as well. He was priced at about 207K. He's got a break even of 18. He gave me about 38 points last week on a double game week. I would have liked more. He seems like a guy who does a lot more and doesn't really get many Supercoach points for it. So he will leave my team this week, and Will Hickey as well. I just don't see the role there. His break even is probably at a price point and a point sort of price point as well, where I think he may sort of struggle to get that some weeks as well. So I think I'll take my 20K that I've made or my 25K from Will Hickey and move on from him as well. But it's going to be interesting because at the end of the day, it's a very exciting part that we're in, I guess, this sort of little bit of here, because we're starting to see some price increases, some decreases. The schedule's really starting to play a pivotal part now, and we're getting into a very, very good part of NBL Supercoach. But Jez, we're going to take a quick little break here, mate, and we'll come back and we'll reveal our final teams, I guess, for round number 4. Alrighty, so Jez, it's time to get stuck in to each other's teams, I guess you could say. And this is where we have, I guess, the most amount of fun picking and prodding and all that sort of stuff in each other's teams. Now, I'm going to start it off with your team first, mate, if we can. I'm going to get Ryan, our trusty producer, to bring this up. And we're going to put you in the firing line straight away. Now, let's just touch on what you've currently done trades-wise, and how you're sort of, I guess, trying to structure your team for this week, and obviously, like you've been talking about, for next week as well.
Yeah, well, someone I didn't mention in the buys is actually someone that I brought back into my team, and that's Cam Oliver. That's sort of the situation that I've fallen in going around this whole Magnay debacle that I do have. So I brought in Cam Oliver, and I also brought in Sam Menenga, and that's planning towards, with the tactic at the moment, that I'm making sure that I'm in good stead for round 5 as well as round 4. But it is a risk because it does leave me a little bit open for a lower score this week to score some more points next week. So that's where I've got to work out, and after probably another 100 trades back and forth this week before Thursday's game, trying to puzzle it all together and get the right options in. But yeah, starting with Jalen Adams, I think Jalen Adams has a little bit of a better matchup this week than Kendrick Davis, and we'll go into that when I go through my Darks doubles. But I've got him as my captain, and also still with Kendrick Davis. Then I have Harrell, Oliver, and I've had to bring in Lepepe into my starting side, being on the double game week, and hope he scored 23 this week, which was a pretty decent score and could amount to say like 40 hopefully on the double game week this week if you keep him in. But it could also mean that I bring in, if I have Magnay on the bench, I'm not sure if I'll start Magnay and just hope that he gets a 40. So that's a little bit of a tough spot there. Then I still have Lapmine on a double game week, have Menenga for next week but won't score, and then Henschel and Antonio still in the mix there at the moment. But yeah, they're a little bit of dead weight, I think, especially with Perth having single game weeks for the next 3 weeks. It sort of hurts to have Henschel there. But I don't know, it's the situation you're in. Someone's got to be the sacrifice, and you just hope that he scores sort of 25 plus. Fire away, Josh. What would have you done and what would have you not done?
It's going to be interesting, mate. I like the sort of, I guess, dynamics of your team to a certain extent. Now, I guess I'm going to get onto one player in particular, and that's Kelly Lepepe. Now, I'm being serious. I don't mind it, to be honest with you. You've got Oliver, who I'm a massive fan of. You've got Adams in there as well, with Davis coming off a good week. Harrell's been incredible. Looks like a walking double-double. So I think in terms of those 4, it's very, very solid. But the only change that I'd make on your team is I'd actually start Will Magnay over Lepepe. So Lepepe, yes, he had 23 points, but he was allowed to score 22 points, actual sort of scoring points. So 22 scoring points for 23 Supercoach points. It's just not viable because we know he's not going to score that most weeks. I think he's a guy who's probably a 5 to 8 points per game sort of scorer with a couple of rebounds, I think, personally. So, I think his average is sort of inflated a little bit, obviously, with that game last weekend. I think he's more of a 10 Supercoach guy, so maybe you're looking getting 20 points out of him. So that's been a question that I've seen everywhere on social media and everything that I've been in is, do we start Kelly Lepepe? I'm not certain, but I think you've got to have him in your team because he's going to make some genuine cash for you. Because when we look back to his break even, he's got an 8 break even to hit over 2 games, which he'll genuinely do, I think, personally. But very, very solid team. I'm not set, though, on the Sam Menenga move, to be honest with you. I think you've gone the week too early. I understand what you're doing, but if it was a guy, someone a little bit better, I could understand it. But I'm just not sure if his role is going to be there when they come back from the States, because he hasn't been faded out by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a lot of talk that Taco Fall will come back with the New Zealand Breakers after these games. So that's a bit of a watch for me, mate. But it's a very, very solid team, to be honest with you, mate. A good projection there. And I'm looking forward to hearing about, obviously, Darks doubles later on in terms of who you're going to captain.
Before we move on, I think the important thing for me too, if I'm taking this tactic of making sure that I'm in good stead for next week, it's also that I've got 100 grand in the bank, which is going to obviously mean that I can still keep sort of one of these gun scorers as like in my guards and be able to pick up PJC. So I have that cash, which is really, really important. So you have that, you can pick up the best guys for next week. If that's trying to even pick up maybe Milton Doyle and PJC in some way, and then having one of these other big gun scorers on your bench to get rid of Antonio or Henschel, and have that sort of if you're going to max it and you're going to plan for the following week, I think you've got to max it and make sure that you can get the best guys in that double game week and not be so you can maximize that score.
It's definitely going to be a very interesting sort of watch over the next couple of weeks, because if your team currently sits and sort of stands the way that it is right now, we could have two different tactics, which will make it interesting, mate. But we're going to bring my team up onto the screen right now, and I'm going to touch on obviously some of my trades that I've got going on. So currently I've traded out Will Hickey and obviously Marcus Lee, and I've brought in Taron Armstrong and Rocco Zakarski. So Rocco Zakarski comes into this particular game with a -3 break even after his 18 points last week. Now we're at that point where I was talking about when we're starting with Rocco Zakarski. I wanted to see how he would go. And now that the cash flow will start to come now, hopefully, I think it's a nice little moment to bring him in. He's only going to play single game weeks. That's completely fine. I think personally, because he's got a -3 break even, if let's just say he keeps giving me 15, 15, 15, he should run up to about 160K in no time. And that should be a good little point there as well, where he has a good game. He pumps that sort of break even back down again, and we're making more money. So it's going to be interesting. And obviously Taron Armstrong as well, coming on the double game week with a break even of 13. I think he's going to have a massive role for the Cairns Taipans. I just think realistically, I'm trying to build a bit of a team where I've got some points on the bench, because I think bench points are still very valuable. So I'm still holding Shay Lee and Darius Days, who, Days has still got a break even of 19. So let's just say he gives me another 30. I'm making another 10K there. Illy's back down to an 8 break even. He gives me another 20 to 25. I'm making cash as well. So I'm still getting points as well as sort of making cash. Until the making cash stops, that's when I'll get rid of those guys when their schedules start to sort of dry out. But as long as I'm making money, I'm not too disappointed, to be honest with you, mate. But yeah, obviously I'm starting Jack White on the single game week currently. I was thinking about using a boost to bring in Xavier Cooks or Jalen Adams, but I'm going to save that for next week. I think I'm going to use another boost next week. And obviously this only double game week with two teams playing it. But yeah, what are your thoughts, mate? Because it's a different tactic to yourself. I think I would say I've got a stronger bench than yourself currently, and I've still got a lot of cash to be made on the bench as well. But yeah, my starters are a lot weaker than obviously what you've got, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but what I like about it is the money making aspect, because obviously Zakarski is a very smart move in the fact that he could just be a slow burner on a single game week, but then you're playing a little bit of the long game with him there. And then Taron Armstrong, it was an interesting buy. I looked at him as well, like really quickly. I think it's the key with Taron is, he's going to have this like a fairly good jump this week, being on the double game week, and will smash that break even. And then he's definitely a hold next week, being just on a single game week. And then in round 6 goes on to that double game week. So, and then you're probably even likely to hold him to get the full potential out of his price projection, even going all the way to round 7 we're looking at now, and holding him through there to make sure you max out that price. So that's someone that I will definitely be looking at when I reevaluate my team later on in the week. But I think that is, extremely strong. But with Jack White, I don't know. I definitely, for me personally, you wouldn't be looking to boost. I don't even think you'd have the cash to be able to sell Jack White and bring in Xavier Cooks, or I think it would be pretty tight there.
It's tight, but it'd be a Darius Days that would most likely move out of my team, and Jack White would go onto the bench, to be honest with you. Yeah. I'd be a couple of K around it, but I'd be able to figure it out in some sense.
Yeah, but it is, But I don't know, like, you're just taking a very, very different tactic. I'm not going to be so critical, because you're playing definitely that long game to make sure that you do have the cash later on. And if you're comfortable sitting around in the standings the way that you are sitting, then that's fine, because you know that, all right, I'm going to have the cash to have some of these big guns at the end of the year, where I'm sort of trying to work a little bit more of a slow burner cash flow and work these sort of middles a little bit more maybe, and get my increases through some of these top players that still have fairly low break evens, where they're not losing cash but earning just a little bit, instead of working these big sort of jumps at the sacrifice of points. So it is interesting. I love that we can have these sort of discussions, and we are working two different tactics, which I think is really great for our listeners, because someone's a little bit more cautious, someone's a little bit more gung-ho on points, and we'll see what happens at the end of the day, at the end, and see who is on top and who is not, which will be me, of course.
No, definitely. But when we're looking at obviously my trades, I've obviously traded Marcus Lee for Rocco Zakarski, who I think, to be honest with you, mate, in single game weeks, they're pretty much like for like, I think.
Same.
And then obviously, I think I've upgraded Will Hickey to Taron Armstrong as well. So, you know, I look back to last week, I know obviously Jack White's on the single, or I could even play a Darius Days on the single. I just think at the end of the day, though, I'm wanting to bring in guys, and this is what I did last season, and it really worked with me, bringing in guys that I think are proven, who are scoring well and are still making cash, like Darius Days and Jack White, for example. You hold them guys for as long as possible, because the schedule will always turn at some stage where those guys are valuable. And I think, to be honest with you, I'd rather hold those guys than downgrade to somebody else and maybe lose a bit of that cash that I've made with those guys as well. So it's going to be interesting because, you know, my bench is pure, I think, cash generation, which is the main aim of the game, to be honest with you. You want the most amount of cash the quickest you can, because at the end of the day, if I can start to buy these top end players quicker than yourself, and obviously even be able to bring these guys onto the bench to a certain extent as well, then obviously it's going to make my life a lot easier when we are touching on some of these points as well. Now, obviously, when we're touching on points, the most important part is to nail down some of these captains. And we've obviously put the responsibility solely on our man, Jeremy Dark. Now, let's get into Dark's doubles this week, mate. And we're going to hear what you have to say about it. I'm going to give you a bit of, intel and a bit of feedback as well afterwards. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got here, mate, for Dark's doubles.
Yeah, but obviously I was extremely confident coming into this segment last week after I think I hit the top scorer in the first 2 rounds. So I was on cloud 9. Now this one, it is, coming in not as confident, but I think definitely the 3 guys that I'm going to drop are going to have massive weeks. And obviously we start off with Davis, who topped everything last round. He got a 45 and a 41. He's got a really, really good shooting matchup coming up against the Kings. But then things do get a little bit tougher when they play Melbourne in their second game. So you could see him definitely go into a really, really good scoring game against the Kings in a shootout in what's likely to be, a really, really high scorer of a match where both teams are likely going to finish over 90 points. And he'll be heavily involved, of course. But Melbourne could shut him down. And we could see him scoring less points, like actual points, not Supercoach points, and which is obviously going to affect his score heavily. Then I'm having a look at 2 guys that we talked about at the top of the 2 big buys of the week, and that's Xavier Cooks and Jalen Adams. Now, Xavier Cooks got a 48 last week on a single game week, but that was against Brisbane, so you have to remember that. Things do get a little bit tougher for Xavier Cooks because he is going up against Adelaide. And although they're not a direct matchup, I think Adelaide have been really strong in the paint. And you do see a lot of Xavier Cooks' points are from sort of tip bins. He's getting the rebound, getting the points. He's also driving really, really hard to the rim. And is he going to be able to do that with Hurrell standing there and the presence that he provides down low for Adelaide? But then comes up against Cairns, and we discussed this in our Beyond the Buzzer episode. Is going to be really interesting to see how well Cooks plays against Cairns, and the things could be a little bit sort of it could be he could go off there, I think. So then we move on to Jalen Adams. Very ordinary. It was a really, really weird week for Jalen Adams. He took shit socks. He took 6 shots. And only scored 2 points against Brisbane. But it felt like he just sort of took his foot off the gas there and didn't have to be the superstar. So you think coming up against Adelaide and Cairns this week, 2 teams that went 2-0 last weekend, we should see him feature a lot and see a lot of ball, and can definitely take a lot of shots and a lot of threes against both of these teams. So I expect him to have a huge week again this week and get back on the train and make up for letting me down last week with just a 26 in a single game week. What are your reactions, and are you going with any of these guys, or what's your call?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, mate, I think there's only one captain option in my team, unless I wanted to risk it a little bit and go with Cam Oliver. But I've got Kendrick Davis currently as my captain. So I think he's going to be the guy that I do run with. It's very easy to it's very easy to go with him after his massive week last week. But like you said, there is a bit of a flag with those matchups. But the guy that he is and the player that he is, he sort of reminds me a little bit of Patrick Miller. I know he's not the size of Patrick Miller, but he's very aggressive. And if you go back and look at Paddy Miller's numbers against Melbourne, he just dominated them because he's such a quick guard, a physical guard, and could really hit the mid-range shot down nicely, which is what Kendrick Davis can do. So I don't know if the flag is there 100% against Melbourne United, nor with the Sydney Kings either. So I think he's definitely the number one captain option for myself personally. I spoke about on Beyond the Buzzer, which will be coming up very soon, that Xavier Cooks is, I think, a little bit under pressure in a sense against maybe the Cairns Taipans to a certain extent. I think they've got a number of guys who they can throw at Xavier Cooks to really halt his production and I guess his sort of efforts as well, and really make that a hard matchup. So that's one to watch. Obviously, I think Brisbane are a bit of an anomaly. I think you can sort of scratch those games out of the windows a little bit, to be honest with you, and leave them behind you because they're a very, very weak and poor team. But Jalen Adams is one that I've just pulled up this particular game. Now, when we're looking at these two teams, the Adelaide 36ers and the Cairns Taipans, I think they have a very similar sort of game plan and game style to the Illawarra Hawks. Now, I know they haven't had the success so far the Illawarra Hawks have, but they play very similar games. It's a more offensive game, but it's a more transitional defensive game as well, which could hold up very well against the Sydney Kings. Now, I've put up this game for one particular reason, where Jalen Adams had 9 points, 6 rebounds, and 9 assists, and shot 2 of 12 against the Hawks, and really, really struggled in that particular game as well. So could we see potentially another game like that from Jalen Adams? Because let's just say he has one good game and one poor game, but there's a chance he could have 2 poor games as well because, you know, Mike Wells looks like a tremendous defensive coach, and I think Adam Ford's definitely starting to get it going with the Cairns Taipans. They're not going to allow Jalen Adams to have full reign of this particular game as well. So it's going to be very interesting. I think with these captain choices, there's a little bit of a flag for most of them this week, which is always fun, isn't it, when we're trying to pick one? But yeah, it's definitely going to be an exciting prospect. But maybe a little bit of a left field one's going Montrezl Harrell, mate, who you've got in your team, and maybe running with him because he's a double threat, I think, most nights. But yeah, have you got any other thoughts on the captain's sort of chat, mate?
No, it is. It is really, really tough this week, I think. There's no one set in stone. There's not even two guys that are like, okay, one or the other, kind of like what it was a little bit last week, or for me anyway. So, yeah, it's tough, but it's important. You got to nail it. Otherwise, you fall behind straight away.
No, definitely. I think it's going to be a very interesting week. But, mate, that is going to wrap up today's episode. Now, when we're looking at our teams, it sort of looks a little bit like the inpatient Pos Pets. And I haven't really figured a name out for mine. I sort of come up with that a little bit quickly, mate. But yeah, obviously very different strategies in a sense. You're more chasing those big point rounds, where I'm sort of trying to sort of even the playing field a little bit and making that cash so I can come over the top of everyone in the competition as well. But very good round by yourself again, mate. 159th, I think you said there, mate. So obviously very well and truly in the striking range, and I'm up to 651. So looking forward, obviously, to seeing how we do continue to go. But if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to be answered, Josh. Definitely, mate. I'm like an old sort of back-starting horse, mate. I've got to get going and I can fly home, mate. But we'll see how we go. But if you guys have got any questions that you guys need to ask us, make sure you go and check us out at the Basketball Fix podcast on Instagram, and make sure you hit us up with those questions as well. We'll answer them. We'll put out a few stories as well as the day goes on and the week goes on as well, in terms of questions that you would like to be answered, and we'll answer them on our Instagram page as well. But until next time, mate, that has been NBL Supercoach Sessions. We're looking forward to seeing who is going to be the king next week, and enjoy your basketball fix.
Turnover at halfway. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh,